Years ago, right here in this church, there was a woman who was a friend of mine who asked me to come over to her senior living apartment because she wanted to plan her funeral. She knew that she was dying, and this wasn't traumatic for her. In fact, I would say if there's ever been someone that's been more excited to be in the presence of Jesus, it was this woman. And when I met with her, she asked me for something that has never been asked of me prior to that or since. And I'm going to tell you what she asked for. But I want you to know that that woman settled the question that most of us spend our lives dodging. Not how does this world end, but how do I end? What is my end like? I mean, we joke about the end of the world, right? We joke about like some giant meteor coming and taking out the earth, or some zombie apocalypse of some sort, or maybe a giant tsunami that's going to wash over everything. We can joke about it because, well, it's something unknown in the future, very abstract. And I think we can joke about it because we all go through it together. But here's what we don't joke about: the end that comes with your name on it. That's the fear underneath the fear. It's not the headlines that we worry about. It's the funeral that you can't stop replaying. It's the math you do on your own age in the dark. It's the question that sits on the edge of the bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. When is it going to be my turn? And am I ready? Does death get the last word on the people who I love who have been buried? And will death get the last word on me? The book of Revelation has been accused of being a scary book about the end of the world. Now, this is our 4th week in this series. I hope that if you have been here for these 4 weeks, that you know that that is not true. Nothing could be further from the truth. But this book of Revelation is much more personal than it is scary. It is the only book with the nerve to ask that 2 o'clock in the morning question. So when you think of your life, where does this 2 o'clock in the morning question invade you? How does it live in your house? Maybe there's a grave that you can't visit. Or maybe it's a grave that you do visit. Maybe it's a diagnosis that you received where you did the 5-year survival math in the parking lot. Or the birthday this year that felt a lot less like celebration and more like a countdown. Maybe it's the parent who's declining, and as you watch them decline, you see your own decline in their experience. Maybe it's the will that you just can't write, because if you do, somehow it makes it real. Maybe it's the person that you buried and it didn't have a nice ending to it. There wasn't a deathbed peace. There was no happy ending, and you're questioning right now where they are. Or maybe it's your own personal faith questions that you have postponed for decades. Saying, I'll get serious about God later. And later keeps getting shorter. The last book of the Bible spends its final chapters exactly here. This is what the focus is on. Not on the end of the world, but on whether you are ready for yours. And what is actually waiting on the other side. Now let me tell you a little something about Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19 is one of my favorite chapters of any book in the entire Bible. As it kicks off, heaven opens up. I mean, I'm trying to visualize what it looks like to have heaven split. And then what comes out of that is a rider on a white horse. He is a king. In fact, it says that his name is faithful and true, and that he is king over all kings and he is Lord over all lords. And this is it. This is the showdown that the world has been dreading ever since the dragon showed up. Armageddon. Now, there are two very important details that really drive the whole theology of this battle that's about to take place. The first is that this writer, his robe is dipped in blood before the fighting begins. I mean, nobody has been touched yet. The only blood available in that scene is his own blood. The writer himself, this King of Kings, Lord of Lords, shows up to the last battle wearing the wound that won the battle. Because the decisive engagement of this war wasn't fought at the end of history. It was fought in the middle of history on a cross. That's the image that's in front of us. And the weapon that he carries is a sword, a sharp sword, it says. And it also says that it's coming from his mouth. It's not in his hand. He wins by speaking the same way that he spoke the universe into being. Even the armies of heaven behind him are dressed in wedding linen, it says. Not armor, not with weapons. They are dressed in wedding linen. And then the verse that follows, they never even lift a finger. Because here's the thing about the battle in Revelation 19 that surprises every first-time reader that actually sits down and reads the book of Revelation. In fact, I would say it is the number one thing that someone will come to me and tell me of their aha moment as they read the book of Revelation. You know what they say? There was no battle. Where was the battle? I hear about Armageddon. Where is this battle? It is true that the beasts and the kings, they mount up. They gather their armies. They are dressed to the hilt to be able to battle and to have this big battle. But the thing that happens in this, single event that takes place is that there's no combat that is even described. There's no swings traded between. And the beast is captured, and the false prophet is captured with him. Because, friends, in the book of Revelation, Armageddon is not a battle, it's an arrest. God is fulfilling the arrest warrant on Satan. So if you've been bracing for Armageddon, the end of the world, to be this coin flip that's going to happen between good and evil, and who knows how it's going to turn out, you can stand down. The book gives the final conflict only 2 verses, because there was never any suspense that it needed to stretch. And then after chapter 19, we open chapter 20, and we get the 10,000 years, the famous millennium. Well, what is your position, and where do you sit on that, and what charts do you follow, and what graphs do you follow? I want to be very transparent with you as I get ready to tell this next part of Revelation, because faithful, Bible-loving Christians have read this chapter very differently for centuries. And there are some readers that I deeply respect that would draw it differently than I'm about to draw it for you. So I want to show you my reading. This is my reading with open hands. It is not my reading alone. It's not like I just came up with this theory. I am following a very strong tradition. It's the one that makes the most sense to me. That's the one I'm going to show you here this morning. But again, if you disagree or you have a different path in it, that's all right. We still love Jesus together, because the ground at the end is what matters, and that we do share together regardless of your position. So the text, as I get ready to read what's here, the dragon is already chained up, and it says specifically that the dragon is chained so it cannot deceive the nations any longer. Thrones show up, and then Revelation chapter 20, I'll start at verse 4. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony about Jesus and for proclaiming the word of God. They all came to life again, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. The rest of the dead did not come back to life until the 1,000 years had ended. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. For them, the second death holds no power. But they will be priests of God and Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. Okay, now, if you hear that and you're like, say what? It's okay. There's first deaths and first resurrections and second deaths and second resurrection. It can sound really, really confusing. I want to simplify this as best as I can. I want you to focus on two things here. One is a number, and the other is a word. First, I want to start with the number, 1,000. Because before you build a calendar for your end times of 1,000 years and how you place that in history somewhere, I want to ask you a couple of questions on how the Bible uses the word 1,000 in every single case. God owns the cattle on how many hills? It's not a trick question. Come on, those of you that know your Bible. Yeah, 1,000. That God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Does he own the cattle on exactly 1,000 hills and that's it? No, you can tell by the writing, right? You can tell that, literally, if it's that, you'd have to have a number on each hill. And then when you get to 1,001, that one can be mine, because God only owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, but not the next one. No, we all know that means a vast number of hills. He keeps his promise to how many generations? 1,000 generations. So generation 1,001, sorry, God's promises aren't for you. It was only for 1,000. We know that's not the case. We don't count generations. We just know that 1,000 means a vast number of generations. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years. Exactly? No, it's vast time. And then he goes on to reverse that. He says 1,000 years are like a day. The vastness of time is all within God's control. We don't count the hills. We don't count the generations. For the Bible, 1,000 is never, ever, ever a length. Ever. It's a word. And the word you could replace it with is vast. Anybody who was reading the Bible, they come to 1,000, that is a vastness. 1,000 equals vast. So John is not handing you some kind of stopwatch. He's saying that it's longer, this reign of Christ is longer than you can hold in your head. It's a length of time. And then the second thing I want you to see is the word souls. Because it's not bodies, it's souls. And these are the same martyrs that we met that were underneath the altar 2 weeks ago in that message. The ones that were crying, how much longer? Remember? How much longer, Lord? And they were crying out right underneath the altar. And they are now alive, and they are reigning with Christ. And notice where this sits in Revelation, because this sits before bodies come out of the grave at the end of the chapter. When Christ returns, it's before that time. So friends, I believe what John is doing here is he is showing us what happens to the person who dies as a follower of Christ. And I think the best way to do this is to draw it for you. So, here we go. Start the clock. Here's where I get tied up. Now, I'm going to tell you why I'm drawing this too. I wasn't planning on drawing this. I got this board out last night as I came here to practice yesterday afternoon, whatever it was. But I've been trying to tell my wife about this. And every time I try to tell her about the 1,000 years, she goes, that makes sense. Okay, back to the drawing board. And I sit down a second time. She said, nope, doesn't make sense. She has questions. I don't have good answers. I'm like, okay, I'll work on it again. The last time we were sitting in Shields in the restaurant across the table, I'm like, I got this. And she's like, nope. I'm like, okay, I'll do it again. I wanted to show this one to her, but she went to work. She's a nurse. She's been gone. I haven't seen her in a day and a half. I don't know if this one works either. We'll see, sweetie. I'm going to show you 2 lives, the timeline of 2 lives. And I'm going to be in front of this, but I'll step out of the way too. So the first timeline, this is a timeline of someone's life. And then I'm making dashes. That'll make sense in a minute. Then a second timeline. This one has no dashes. The ups and downs of my lines is just because I'm wavy. It's not like a bad times, good times. It's just life, okay? Life that happens. So, what's the first thing we all have in common? Birth, yeah. This is going to be the timeline for someone who doesn't know Christ, and this can be a timeline for someone who does know Christ, okay? Birth. So, both lives have birth, and then what's the other thing that we all have in common? Death. Death and what? You got that right. But Jesus, well, he did talk about taxes, but not here. Okay, so this is death. Birth and death. So this is your life. Now, the Christian, somewhere in their life, they accept Christ. Could be early, could be later. It doesn't even matter. We'll just put it here for the sake of space. So that person accepts Christ. Now, there's a period of time that we don't know. Now, the scripture just called it 1,000 years, but there's a period of time between death and resurrection. It's already been over 2,000 years, when Christ is going to return. So again, this is Christ's return. Okay? Does this make sense so far? Jenny? Maybe? So Christ returns, and so we've got this period of time from our death till Christ returns. Now, I'm going to be honest with you here, is that for the person who doesn't know Christ, Scripture is incredibly vague on what happens, like what's happening right now, from the time that they died until Christ returns. There are a couple of glimpses that we have. One is a parable that Jesus tells where you can see people in two of the areas. The parable is not about that, so I don't know how much to lean into that, but there is very little information for what's happening. There is an awareness that is there. So there is a presence of some sort. But remember, these are souls at this point. This is just souls. The resurrection of the body hasn't happened yet. Now, for the person who is a Christian, we have this thing that we just read about in Revelation that is the 1,000 years. So how long is this period of time in years? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's vast. Is it 1,000 years? But it says it's 1,000 years. That's because 1,000 years is the word used for a vast amount of time. And these are souls reigning with Christ. And so, with this, we have this understanding that when we die and we wait for Christ's return, we are in this vast period of time. And throughout history, people have died at different times in history, and it doesn't matter. Whenever you enter in, you're entering into the 1,000 years period of time, the vast period of time, and that time is getting shorter and shorter. I don't know how much time is left. People say, like, it's next week. Okay, and then that date comes and goes. It's a vast amount of time. We're all entering into it at a different place, and eventually the moment will come when Christ returns. Now, what happens when Christ returns? For the Christian, there is a new heaven, a new earth, a new body, all that new. For the person that doesn't know Christ, it's the final judgment. And it is a eternal spiritual death separated from God. Make sense so far? I only have a tiny bit more to add that hopefully will make it even clearer. Preachers for centuries that have taught this way have a little saying, and you might have heard this saying before, but it comes from something like what I've drawn here, is that we all have our first birth, and we all have our first death. First death. First death. But for a Christian has a second birth. Whoever be born again, right? Second birth. Second birth. But the non-Christian doesn't have that birth. And then on this end, it's a death for them. And this is now their second death. But the Christian doesn't have a second death. We just enter into heaven. So the way that they used to say it is this: one birth, two deaths, two births, one death. We all have the one birth. This is caskets and casseroles. Okay, we both have that. But the Christian doesn't have the second death, that eternal judgment. One birth, two deaths, two births, one death. Booyah. In other words, your grandmother who passed away, she is not in soul sleep. She's not waiting for these 1,000 years to end before she rises from the dead. She is currently in Christ's presence, in soul, reigning with Him. She is more alive today than she has ever been. Now, it's in soul, it's not in that glorified body, but she is with Christ. That's what this teaching communicates. But here's the ground that every single camp shares, no matter how you see the 1,000 years, no matter what your chart might look like, is that Christ returns, the dead are raised, the devil is finished, judgment is real, the kingdom is forever, and Jesus is coming back. So be ready. Amen? That's exactly what it teaches us, which puts the entire thing on your doorstep. Because at the end of the world for you is the end of your life. So the only question left on this line is, are you ready? You see, knowing how the story ends and being ready for your part in it are two very different things. You can have the theology all figured out and have the readiness empty. You can name the millennium camp that you're in and not be able to answer the 2 a.m. question, because readiness is never information. For those who belong to Jesus, your end is not a wall, it is a door. And it is open from His side. You already know how it ends. The only live question left in your life is whether you're ready for how you do die. In my own life, I found it unable to forgive that teacher. I could not. And the could not was a country that I had never visited before. I preached for decades for forgiveness because I thought that forgiveness came easy to me. I communicated that forgiveness came easy to me. And then I found what my easy forgiveness had never been tested against. My hatred didn't need a staircase. It arrived whole in one single afternoon. And I knew that the road back to life, the road that I needed to travel, was going to be a way through forgiveness. And I had handed that map of how to forgive 100 times to 100 people. And for months for me, as I prayed, the prayers wouldn't form. I'd sit quietly before God, and I could not form the words of a prayer, not even about that situation, but to God Himself. But little by little, and I do mean little by little, there have been moments for me of forgiveness in that situation. Moments. Because, friends, I have discovered it is very difficult to forgive. But standing here and knowing the end of the book of Revelation, I finally had to ask what all of it, the thrones, the white tears, the open door, means for the man who shattered my family. And the honest answer is the one that cost me the most, but has also given me the most. And it is this: that teacher has a seat available around the throne. The same exact blood that closed the case against me is on offer for his case. And if he takes it, and I tell you, my prayers have only gotten me to this part, because I've come to the place of genuinely hoping that he does take it. But then I am faced with the reality that he and I may one day worship together at the feet of Christ. And the hatred that lives in me right now today will not be in me there. because it'll be on the list of former things. Because when God wipes every tear, He's going to be wiping these tears, the ones that I've carried since I got a January phone call. And if I'm doing the arithmetic honestly, it's also tears that I've had since what happened when I was 5 years old. Tears half a century deep. And all my tears are scheduled for 2 warm, scarred hands. I still struggle to forgive. But I have come to believe deep down in the foundations that God does not struggle to forgive. And I'll confess the selfish door that I walk through to get to any form of forgiveness, because it is a selfish door. If God can forgive that person, the sin that took the most from me, then there is no arithmetic left for which He cannot forgive me. Not a finished victory, but a guaranteed one. The how long that I shook my fist up to God, how long till I received justice? I never got a date for that. Instead, I got an address. The woman asked me to come over to her house to talk about her funeral. It's not uncommon. You might think, oh, that's kind of a weird thing. That is not uncommon for me. She want to talk about the songs that we're going to sing and verses that would be read and certain elements of that whole thing. And then she told me a story from her childhood. When she was a little girl, she grew up in a big family. Her grandmother would move around the table when they were all together, eating together. And she would be clearing the dishes. And she said when she came to her, she'd lean down and say, "Hold your fork." And a little girl's heart, of course, would jump, because she knew that what her grandmother was explaining to her, that something good was on the way. Apple pie, double chocolate cake. The fork meant the meal wasn't over. It might seem like it was over, clearing dishes, meal is done. But Grandma would say, "Hold your fork." The best part was still on its way. She then looked at me and she made her request. She said that when she was in the casket, she wanted me to place a fork in her hand. And she said when the people are viewing it and they see it, they're going to ask why. And I said, yes, they will. I said, is the funeral director going to know about this? Or I'm like covertly slipping this fork in? Like, how are your hands going to be? What do you think? Where are you going to put your hands? I mean, it's not her choice, right? She have her hands. Where am I put it? So, I mean, all these things are, going on in my head. And she says, then you're going to tell them why the fork is there. Some of you maybe have heard a version of this story. It's been passed around by preachers for centuries. You might have found it in an inbox that came to you with a lot of exclamation points behind it. That's kind of how they do those kinds of stories. I'm not here to claim that story started with her or with me. But I am here to tell you something even better. Is that I watched a woman live the fork story. In all my years of ministry, all the funerals that I have performed, which are many, exactly one person has ever asked me to put a fork in their hand, and she did it. We did it together. And I stood at her casket, and I told a room full of people about her grandmother's table. And I watched the strangest, most wonderful thing happen at a funeral. There was a buzz, and there were smiles at a casket. It was all anybody could talk about at that funeral. And what they were talking about, whether they used the word or not, was the resurrection. One woman's readiness preached better than the pastor could ever have done. And she did it without saying a single word. Sorry, I haven't figured out how to do that. So you got my words. In fact, for her life became this appointment for this dessert for this thing that was better, that was yet to come. She was holding her fork for her place setting at the wedding feast of the Lamb. Readiness. She wasn't wrong about the dessert. Something better was yet to come. So what's in this next course? Last two chapters, spread it out. Revelation chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven, new earth, and the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea was also gone. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people, and he will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain, and all these things are gone forever." Heaven comes down. The earth remade new, like the glorified body made new. You can still see the scars from the old body, but it's made new. There may be scars we see from the earth, but it's made new again. Heaven coming down. And then the verse that this book, if there was only one verse that people would take out of the whole book of Revelation, it's got to be this. I've heard it at most funerals that I've done, is that he will wipe every tear from their eyes. And you have to read that like a homesick person would read it. It doesn't say that there'll be no more tears. There will have been tears. There have been oceans of tears. And they're not ignored and they're not waved away. The tears are wiped. Personally, the pronoun used here is he will do it. The way a parent takes a child's face in two hands. Every tear that this book has witnessed, every tear that has been shed, the ones that are under the altar, the ones that were shed because of a school office, the ones that have been shed at every graveside since Eden. And then one of the only moments in the whole book where God is on the throne and he speaks. Starting at verse 5. And the one sitting on the throne said, "Look, I am making everything new." And then he said to me, "Write this down, for what I tell you is trustworthy and true." And he also said, "It is finished. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. To all who are thirsty, I will give freely from the springs of the water of life, and all who are victorious will inherit all these blessings, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." The promise has an address. And the very next verse names the ones who refuse it. And this book never pretends otherwise. The door is real. And so staying outside of it is real. But hear how this author runs. To all who are thirsty, freely it's given to you. The last chapter of the Bible flings the door wide open for all who will receive, for all who will drink from this spring. Let everyone who is thirsty, is what the scriptures say, come. Nobody is standing outside the city because God ran out of room. The only way to miss it is to refuse the drink. So change what it is that you personally are bracing for. If you've been treating your own ending like a wall, the place where everything you love stops, read the last two chapters of Revelation, read them slowly, and read them carefully. Because death is door number one. And for the child of God, that is as far as death is going to get. The city comes down, and every single tear you have shed is scheduled for two warm hands. The end is not a wall. It is a door. And someone is holding it wide open. The end, it turns out, is the beginning. In December of 2004, a young couple that I love, Scott and Aubrey, They sat at a little round oak table that's in my office, still there today. Aubrey at that time was 19 weeks pregnant, and the doctors had found something. Their baby girl had a condition called anencephaly, where her brain and skull weren't forming, and babies who have it don't live. There's no treatment for this. And Scott and Aubrey, as they sat in my office, they chose to carry their daughter, to love her as long as she was given. Now, the months that followed were some of the hardest that I have seen a family walk, because a pregnancy is a very public thing. Strangers who didn't know the story would light up and congratulate her, and people who didn't know, or who did know, didn't know what to say. And so many people that cared and that it mattered to didn't say anything at all, and silence has its own weight that you carry. When I saw them here at church or wherever, I tried to encourage them with what I did know, what I did believe was true, which was what was growing inside of Aubrey. There was no medical term for that. She was a child, a human being that God had made and had given to them. And out ahead of it all waited a delivery room, a place where life and death were going to arrive in the exact same moment. And on February 25th, 9 weeks early, on a timeline that belonged to God and nobody else, the phone rang. The baby was coming. I packed up what I could. They were going to have some time just as a family first, which was important. But I didn't know what to say. As I headed there, I couldn't help but think of the death, the loss, the pain, the hurt that they would be experiencing. What could I do to speak into that moment? I had no idea. I just went knowing God is present, but I didn't understand what I was going to do. The baby was born shortly after 7 that morning, a little girl. And she was born alive. And she lived for 30 minutes. And here's what love looked like in that room. Her mother held her. Her father held her. Grandparents held her. And that's all. Aubrey kept her daughter close, unwilling to hand those minutes to a crowd, and she was right to. The people who loved her the longest held every minute of her life that there was to hold. And through that morning, other people started to show up. Family and friends, their pastor, filling that hospital waiting space with love. I'm going to tell you what I found on that floor in that room, because it was not what I had braced myself for when I was heading there. Now, death had been there. I don't want to downplay that. It was real and it was grieved. It did what death does. That's just what death does. But death had not been in charge in that room. Love ran that room. Presence filled that whole floor that owed nothing to anything that I said or carried in. God was the one that was there. And he was there the exact same way that he stood amongst the lampstands, and the same way that he stood on Patmos Island. Not one of us here is guaranteed a number of days on this earth. We aren't even guaranteed a number of hours. But the half hour that little girl lived was spent entirely in the arms of the people who loved her. And the morning she left, the place that she left behind was the fullest room that I've stood in. And her parents gave her the most beautiful and perfect name. Her name is Grace. Hillcrest, you can run the entire book of Revelation over that 30 minutes, that half hour. Was the throne that morning empty? No, it was not. Was she kept? Yes, she was kept through the fire and all the way through. Death's number one, that first death, did the best it could. And a little girl who never spoke a word passed straight into the presence of Jesus. And she's more alive this hour right now than any of us have ever been. And whose mark was on her was the mark of the Lamb. She wore no other mark during her life. And how does her story end? It doesn't end. It does not end. Every tear cried on that floor, in that room, is on the list, scheduled for 2 warm hands. And the God who wipes them gave the world his last word in the Bible's final verse, and the last word is grace. The end of the world has a name in our own church family, and her name tells you everything about how it ends. You don't have to crack the code. You just have to keep the faith. I've said that again and again each Sunday. There might be a code, there might be a chart. You don't need a chart. You just need to keep the faith. You already know how it ends, so you can keep the faith. This morning you were given a fork when you came in. And I hope now you know why you got the fork. And if you end up getting a plastic one because we ran out of wood ones, we didn't run out. I just didn't know where they were. So the wood ones are in the back. If you want to exchange it for your plastic one, feel free to do so. But I want you to have this fork, and I want you to set it somewhere that you see it on a regular basis. On your desk, your dashboard, your nightstand. And every time it catches your eye, I want you to ask the one question that this entire book has been asking. You might even want to write it on the fork. Am I ready? And however you answer that question, if you answer it affirmatively, I want to celebrate with you today because that's the timeline you're on. And if you are unsure today and you don't know, there is zero excuse of leaving this place without having a definitive answer of yes. It is your choice, whether you're ready or not. The kingdom is here. The door is wide open. The invitation is given. The Lamb has already secured the victory of the battle. You just have to receive it. So as we sing this closing song, make that your prayer. Are you ready? Please stand as we close.